Death by lethal injection. The judge's words hit 82-year-old Teresa Owen like a sledgehammer as she clutched the courtroom table, her aged hands shaking uncontrollably. Teresa Owen, you are guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Jerome Fitzgerald. The room exploded in chaos. Teresa's legs gave out. Execution. She'd never see another sunrise, never water her flowers, never watch children play from her front steps. The elderly black woman who'd raised 3 white foster kids against all odds was now condemned to die for a crime she never committed. "Stop!" A powerful voice cut through the noise. Heavy footsteps rang out as a sharp-dressed man charged down the courtroom aisle. "We're her family, and we have proof that will destroy this verdict." Teresa's breath caught. Those familiar eyes, that determined expression. "Lucas? We're here, Mama T." But to understand how a top prosecutor, a renowned doctor, and a child advocate found themselves fighting the clock to rescue their mother from execution, we must travel back 3 decades to where this extraordinary family's journey first began. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Eva's Stories. I have missed you all so much. Thank you for sticking around with me. I truly appreciate your love and support. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's continue.
Memphis, Tennessee, October 15th, 1994. The funeral home smelled like lilies and lemon polish, a combination that would forever make Teresa Owen feel like drowning. She sat in the front pew of Claiborne Temple, her hands folded over the funeral program that bore her husband Jerome's face. That beautiful smile she'd woken up to for 23 years was now frozen in time on glossy paper. "Sister Teresa, you need anything?" Deacon Washington's voice came from somewhere above her, but she couldn't lift her head to meet his eyes. If she did, if she saw one more look of pity, she might shatter completely. "No, thank you," she managed, her voice steady despite the earthquake in her chest. The church was full. Jerome had been loved. A mail carrier who knew every family on his route, who carried dog treats in his pocket and remembered every birthday. But Teresa felt alone in a way that pressed against her ribs, made breathing feel like labor. They'd tried for children for 15 years. 3 pregnancies that ended in blood and sirens, and Jerome holding her while she screamed. Now she was 52 years old, widowed, and the mother to no one. After the service, after the burial at Memorial Park Cemetery where the October wind cut through her black dress like accusations, after the repast where she smiled and nodded and accepted casseroles she'd never eat, Teresa finally returned to their house on Avalon Street. She stood in the doorway of what would have been the nursery. They'd painted it yellow, neutral, hopeful. After the 3rd miscarriage, Jerome had gently suggested they turn it into his study, but Teresa couldn't. Some part of her still believed God might surprise them. "Well, you surprised me all right," she whispered to the empty room. "Took Jerome instead." The silence that answered felt like a presence, thick and suffocating. Teresa walked to the window and stared out at the street where children rode bicycles and played hopscotch on sidewalks. Their laughter drifted through the glass like music from another world. Her neighbor Mrs. Caldwell was hanging laundry, her own 3 children helping with clothespins. When she spotted Teresa in the window, she waved with the careful enthusiasm people used around the grieving. Teresa waved back, then closed the curtains. The house felt too big now. Every room echoed with conversations that would never happen again. Jerome's coffee cup still sat in the sink, unwashed. His reading glasses lay folded on the kitchen table next to yesterday's newspaper, open to the sports section. Teresa couldn't bring herself to move them. Moving them would make his absence real. She walked to their bedroom and opened the closet. Jerome's uniforms hung in perfect rows, blue shirts pressed and ready for routes he'd never walk again. The smell of his cologne lingered on the fabric. Teresa pressed her face into one of his shirts and breathed deeply, trying to hold onto something that was already slipping away. The phone rang. Teresa ignored it. It rang again. And again. Finally, she answered. Teresa? It's Father Miguel. I wanted to check on you. I'm fine, Father. Are you eating? Teresa looked at the casseroles covering her kitchen counter. Yes. Good. Listen, I know this is difficult, but we could use help at the community center tomorrow. Serving lunch. Nothing strenuous. Sometimes keeping busy helps. Teresa almost said no. The thought of leaving this house, of facing people who would look at her with those careful, pitying eyes, felt impossible. But the silence was becoming unbearable. What time? She heard herself ask. St. Mary's Foster Care Facility, October 15, 1994. Across town, in a building that used to be a Catholic school, 3 siblings sat on a bottom bunk bed, pressed together like survivors of a shipwreck. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sick green pallor that made 12-year-old Lucas Barnett want to punch through the concrete walls. I'm hungry, Diana whispered. At 8, she was all knees and elbows, her blonde hair tangled despite Harlow's attempts to braid it that morning. Dinner's in an hour, Harlow said, though her own stomach was cramped with emptiness. 10 years old and already the family diplomat, she kept her voice cheerful. Remember what Mom used to say? Hunger's just your stomach saying hello. Lucas flinched at the mention of their mother. 6 weeks since the accident. 6 weeks since the police officer had shown up at their school. Her face was careful and sorry. 6 weeks since they'd stood in their aunt's living room in Nashville while she explained to the social worker that she simply couldn't take 3 children, not with 4 of her own and her husband out of work. Mom's dead, Lucas said flatly. Dead people don't say anything. Diana started crying, that quiet, breathless sob she'd perfected since arriving at St. Mary's. Crying too loud brought attention. Attention brought problems. Luke, Harlow warned, pulling Diana closer. He wanted to apologize, but the words stuck in his throat like glass. Instead, he stared at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a dragon. Their dad had taught him about finding shapes in clouds, back when there was a dad, back when clouds mattered. The room they shared with 4 other children smelled like disinfectant and sadness. Their few belongings fit in a single garbage bag at the foot of the bed. Everything else had been sold to pay for the funeral their aunt couldn't afford. Lucas remembered watching strangers walk through their house, picking up his mother's jewelry, his father's tools, Diana's stuffed animals. Putting price tags on their lives. Tell me about the house again, Diana whispered. Harlow closed her eyes. It was blue, with white shutters. And Mom had flower boxes under every window. Petunias and marigolds. The kitchen always smelled like cinnamon because she made those rolls every Sunday morning. And Dad's workshop, Diana prompted. In the garage. He was building you a dollhouse. Remember, it was going to have real electricity and tiny furniture. Lucas remembered. He also remembered the drunk driver who'd run the red light on Highway 40, turning their parents' car into twisted metal and broken dreams. The man had walked away without a scratch. No charges filed. Too connected, the police had said. Too important to prosecute. The door opened and Mrs. Patterson appeared, clipboard in hand. She was nice enough, Lucas supposed, for someone who managed a warehouse of throwaway kids. Her perfume smelled like funeral flowers. Barnett children? There's a family interested in meeting you tomorrow. All of us? Harlow asked, hope creeping into her voice despite the 3 other families who'd wanted to split them up. All of you, Mrs. Patterson confirmed, though her smile seemed strained. Well, it's a bit unusual, but they're approved foster parents. Just remember your manners. After she left, Lucas felt Diana's small hand slip into his. Maybe they'll be nice, she whispered. Lucas didn't answer. Nice was a luxury they couldn't afford to believe in anymore. He'd learned that adults said things they didn't mean, made promises they couldn't keep. Their aunt had seemed nice too, until the social worker left and she'd explained why 3 extra children would ruin her family. "What if they don't want us?" Diana asked. "Then we'll be okay anyway," Harlow said firmly. "We have each other." But Lucas saw the fear in her eyes. They all knew what happened to siblings who couldn't be placed together. The system split them up, scattered them across different homes, different cities. They'd become strangers, sharing only the memory of parents who'd loved them. Outside their window, Memphis stretched into the darkness. Somewhere in that city, families were sitting down to dinner, helping with homework, reading bedtime stories. Normal families with normal problems. Lucas pressed his face to the glass and wondered if they'd ever be normal again. "I miss them," Diana whispered. "Me too," Harlow said. Lucas said nothing, but he pulled his sisters closer. Tomorrow they'd meet another family who might want them, might not. Tonight, they had each other. It would have to be enough. Teresa hadn't meant to volunteer that Sunday. She'd meant to stay in bed, to pull Jerome's pillow over her head and pretend the world had stopped spinning. But her feet had carried her to church out of muscle memory, and Father Miguel had mentioned they needed help serving lunch at the community center, and somehow she'd found herself ladling soup into bowls for a line of people who looked as lost as she felt. The community center occupied the basement of St. Mary's Catholic Church, its concrete walls painted cheerful yellow in an attempt to mask the institutional feel. Folding tables covered with plastic tablecloths filled the space, and the smell of vegetable soup mixed with industrial cleaning supplies. Teresa had volunteered here before Jerome's death, back when helping others felt like a choice rather than a desperate attempt to outrun her own pain. "Thank you, ma'am," each person said as she filled their bowls, and Teresa forced smiles that felt like lifting weights. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory from 20 years of nursing taking over when her mind couldn't focus. Scoop, pour, smile. Scoop, pour, smile. She was refilling the soup pot when she heard Mrs. Patterson's voice cutting through the general chatter. "Now remember, children, best behavior. These people are doing us a kindness by letting you eat here." Teresa looked up to see 3 children following the foster care coordinator through the serving line. The oldest boy had dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that held too much knowledge for 12 years. The middle girl had freckles scattered across her nose and kept one protective hand on the youngest, a blonde waif who couldn't weigh more than 60 pounds soaking wet. Something twisted in Teresa's chest as she watched them. The way they moved together, a unit against the world. The way the older two flanked the little one, shields against whatever might come next. She'd seen that formation before in the pediatric ward where she'd worked. Siblings who'd learned that adults couldn't be trusted, that safety only came from each other. "Next," Teresa called, and the boy stepped forward. He held his bowl with both hands, careful not to drop it. "Thank you," he said, his voice polite but distant. His eyes met hers for just a moment before sliding away. "You're welcome, sweetheart." The endearment slipped out before Teresa could stop it. The boy's eyes snapped back to hers, surprised. The middle girl came next, and Teresa noticed how she positioned herself between her brother and sister, always watching, always ready. "Thank you, ma'am." "What's your name, honey?" "Harlow." "Harlow Keller. That's a beautiful name." "I'm Teresa." Harlow smiled, a real smile that transformed her whole face. "Nice to meet you, Miss Teresa." Then came the little one, Diana, who had to stand on her tiptoes to see over the serving counter. Her bowl shook slightly in her small hands. "Well, hello there, beautiful," Teresa said softly. "What would you like today?" "Soup, please," Diana whispered, her voice barely audible above the room's noise. Teresa ladled extra vegetables into the bowl, making sure to include the soft carrots she'd noticed Diana eyeing. "There you go, baby girl." Diana's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Thank you." Teresa watched them find seats at a corner table, the 3 of them pressed close together despite having the whole table to themselves. They ate slowly, making the food last, and Teresa found herself unable to look away. Something about them called to the empty spaces in her heart. She was carrying a fresh tray of cornbread to the serving table when it happened. Diana had been reaching for her water cup when she started coughing. At first, it seemed like nothing, just a child who'd taken too big a bite. But the coughing turned violent, desperate. Diana's face began turning red, then purple. "She's choking!" Harlow screamed. "Oh God, somebody help!" The room erupted in chaos. People jumped up from their tables, chairs scraping against concrete. Mrs. Patterson rushed over, her face pale with panic. But Teresa was already moving. 20 years of emergency room experience kicked in, muscle memory overriding grief and hesitation. She pushed through the crowd, her training taking control of her body. Diana was standing now, hands clawing at her throat, eyes wide with terror. Teresa didn't hesitate. She positioned herself behind the child, wrapped her arms around Diana's small torso, and found the spot just below her ribs. The Heimlich maneuver. She'd performed it dozens of times in the hospital, but never on someone so small, so fragile. "It's okay, baby," Teresa whispered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I've got you." She thrust upward, quick and firm. Nothing. Diana's face was turning blue now, her struggles growing weaker. Teresa adjusted her grip and tried again, putting more force behind it. On the third thrust, a piece of cornbread shot from Diana's mouth and skittered across the floor. The child gasped, air flooding back into her lungs in great, shuddering breaths. Teresa should have let go then. Should have stepped back, let Mrs. Patterson take over, returned to her soup ladle and her careful distance from other people's pain. But Diana turned in her arms, buried her face against Teresa's chest, and sobbed with such force that Teresa felt it in her own bones. The child smelled like industrial soap and fear, but underneath that was something else. Something that reminded Teresa of the baby clothes she'd never gotten to use, the lullabies she'd never gotten to sing. Without thinking, she wrapped her arms around Diana and held her close. "It's okay, baby," Teresa whispered, her hand smoothing the tangled blonde hair. "You're okay now. I've got you. Diana!" Lucas and Harlow crashed into them, their faces streaked with tears. They wrapped their arms around both Teresa and their sister, forming a knot of limbs and relief and something that felt dangerously close to belonging. "Is she okay? Diana, are you okay?" Lucas's voice cracked between child and teenager, all his careful distance forgotten in the face of almost losing his sister. "She's fine," Teresa assured him, but she didn't let go. Couldn't let go. The weight of these children in her arms filled a space she didn't know was empty, or rather, a different empty than the one Jerome had left. This was the empty she'd carried for 20 years, the space carved out by 3 lost pregnancies and a nursery that had never held a baby. "Thank you," Harlow whispered, her face pressed against Teresa's shoulder. "Thank you for saving her. Children, please." Mrs. Patterson appeared, flustered and apologetic. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. They're from the foster facility. We're just here for lunch. Kids, come on now, let the nice lady go." But Diana's fingers had twisted into Teresa's sweater, and she whimpered when Mrs. Patterson tried to pull her away. "It's all right," Teresa said quickly. "They're not bothering me." Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose. She looked at Teresa more carefully, taking in her neat appearance, her gentle manner with the children. Do you have experience with children?" "I'm a nurse," Teresa said. "Pediatric ward at Methodist Hospital." "I see." Mrs. Patterson's expression shifted, became calculating. "These children they're looking for placement. Together. It's been difficult because most families can't take 3 at once." Teresa felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening that had been locked for years. She looked down at Diana, still clinging to her sweater, then at Lucas and Harlow, who watched her with a mixture of hope and fear that broke her heart. "What are their names?" she heard herself ask. "Lucas, Harlow, and Diana Barnett. They lost their parents in a car accident 6 weeks ago. They're good children, very well behaved. They just need someone who can take all three. Teresa's mind raced. She had a 4-bedroom house sitting empty. She had love with nowhere to go. She had a nursery that had been waiting 20 years for children to fill it. Could I? Teresa's voice caught. Could I meet with them? Properly, to talk. Mrs. Patterson's face brightened. Of course. Are you interested in fostering? Teresa looked down at Diana, whose blue eyes were fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. I think I might be. Lucas stepped closer, his voice careful. You'd want all of us? Together. I wouldn't want you any other way, Teresa said, and meant it. For the first time since Jerome's funeral, Teresa felt something other than emptiness. She felt possibility. She felt hope. She felt like maybe, just maybe, God hadn't forgotten about her after all. The 3 children looked at each other, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Harlow spoke. We'd like that, she said simply. We'd like that very much. The social worker's car pulled away from the curb, leaving Teresa standing on her front porch with 3 children and a stack of paperwork that made their placement official. Temporary, the document said. 90-day trial period. But Teresa had already moved Jerome's clothes out of the closet and bought twin beds for what used to be his study. This is it, she said, opening the front door. This is home. The children stepped inside like they were entering a museum, afraid to touch anything. Lucas kept his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Harlow clutched a garbage bag containing their few possessions. Diana hung back by the door, ready to run. Teresa's house was nothing fancy. A 1960s ranch with wood paneling in the living room and avocado green appliances in the kitchen. But it was clean and warm, and it smelled like the vanilla candles she'd been burning to mask the lingering scent of Jerome's cologne. Lucas, you'll have the room at the end of the hall, Teresa said, trying to keep her voice light. Harlow and Diana, you can share the room next to mine. There are twin beds, and we can decorate however you like. Nobody moved. Are you hungry? I made fried chicken for dinner. And mashed potatoes. Diana, I remembered you liked the carrots at the community center, so I got some of those too. Still nothing. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. Why don't you go look at your rooms? Teresa suggested. Get settled in. Dinner will be ready in an hour. The children disappeared down the hallway like ghosts. Teresa heard doors closing, the soft murmur of whispered conversations. She stood alone in her living room, wondering what she'd gotten herself into. An hour later, she called them for dinner. They appeared at the kitchen table like they'd been summoned to court, sitting straight-backed and silent. Teresa had set the table with her good dishes, the ones she and Jerome had received as wedding gifts. She'd even put out cloth napkins. This looks wonderful, Harlow said politely. Thank you, Lucas added, his voice flat. Diana said nothing, just stared at her plate. Teresa served the food, trying to fill the silence with chatter about the neighborhood, the schools they'd attend, the park down the street. The children ate mechanically, answering her questions with yes ma'am and no ma'am and nothing more. You don't have to call me ma'am, Teresa said finally. You can call me Teresa. Or Miss Teresa, if that feels more comfortable. What should we call you? Lucas asked, and there was something sharp in his voice, something that made Teresa look at him more carefully. Whatever feels right to you. What if nothing feels right? Teresa set down her fork. Then we'll figure it out together. Lucas pushed food around his plate. The last family wanted us to call them Mom and Dad right away. Said it would help us bond faster. What happened with that family? They changed their minds, Harlow said quietly. After 2 weeks. Said we were too much work. Teresa felt something hot and protective rise in her chest. Well, I'm not them. And you can take all the time you need. After dinner, the children helped clear the table without being asked, then disappeared to their rooms again. Teresa washed dishes alone, listening to the sounds of her house settling around new occupants. It felt strange having other people here, but not unwelcome. Just different. She was drying the last plate when she heard crying from the girls' room. Soft, muffled sobs that made her heart ache. Teresa stood outside their door, hand raised to knock, then thought better of it. They needed space to grieve, to adjust. She couldn't force comfort on them. The next morning brought new challenges. Lucas refused to eat breakfast, claiming he wasn't hungry. Harlow ate toast in careful, tiny bites. Diana spilled orange juice on the table and burst into tears, apologizing over and over like she expected to be hit. "It's just juice, baby," Teresa said gently, reaching for paper towels. "Accidents happen." But Diana flinched when Teresa moved too quickly, and Teresa realized these children had learned to expect punishment for the smallest mistakes. School was another battlefield. Teresa walked them to the bus stop that first Monday, watching other parents do the same with their biological children. She felt the stares, heard the whispered conversations that stopped when she got too close. "Is that the woman who took in those white kids? I heard she's getting paid by the state. Probably just in it for the money. Those poor children. What's going to happen to them?" Teresa kept her chin up and her smile in place, but the words stung. When the bus pulled away with her children inside, she walked home past neighbors who suddenly found their gardens very interesting. Mrs. Caldwell was watering her flowers when Teresa reached her front yard. "Morning, Teresa," she called out, her voice carefully neutral. "Morning, Helen. Those children settling in okay? They're adjusting." Helen nodded, but her expression was skeptical. "Must be hard for them. Being in a strange place with someone who doesn't look like their family." Teresa stopped walking. "I am their family now." Of course. I just meant, you know what I meant." Teresa did know. She'd been hearing variations of the same sentiment all week. From the grocery store clerk who asked if she was babysitting. From the school secretary who wanted to see documentation proving she had the right to enroll them. From the woman at church who wondered aloud if it was really best for the children to be placed with someone so different from them. The worst part was that some of the criticism came from her own community. Sister Williams had pulled her aside after service on Sunday. "Teresa, honey, I know you mean well, but those children need to be with their own kind. What happens when they start asking questions about their heritage? About where they come from?" "They come from love," Teresa had replied. "That's all the heritage they need." But doubt crept in during the quiet moments. When Lucas looked at her with those guarded eyes. When Harlow politely declined her offers to braid her hair. When Diana had nightmares and called out for her mama, then seemed confused when Teresa appeared instead. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon at Kroger. Teresa was shopping for groceries with all three children in tow. Diana was riding in the cart, chattering about a book she'd read at school. Harlow was helping pick out apples. Lucas was sulking by the cereal aisle, still angry about something that had happened at school. They were in the checkout line when the manager approached. "Excuse me, ma'am. I need to see some identification." Teresa looked up from her wallet. "I'm sorry. Identification. And documentation for the children." The store went quiet around them. Other customers turned to stare. Teresa felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Documentation. We've had reports of suspicious activity. A black woman with 3 white children. We need to verify that you have legal custody." Teresa's hands shook as she pulled out her driver's license and the temporary custody papers. The children pressed closer to her, sensing danger. Diana's eyes filled with tears. "This says temporary custody," the manager said, studying the documents. "How do we know you didn't take these children illegally?" "Because I'm telling you I didn't." Teresa's voice was steady, but inside she was screaming. "These children are in my legal custody through the Tennessee Department of Children's Services. If you have questions about that, You can call them." The manager looked skeptical, but he handed back her papers. "We'll be keeping an eye on this situation." Teresa paid for her groceries in silence, aware of every stare, every whispered comment. The children didn't speak until they were in the car. "Why did he do that?" Diana asked, her voice small. "Because some people are ignorant," Teresa said, then immediately regretted her harsh tone. "Is it because we're white and you're black?" Lucas asked bluntly. Teresa gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Yes. Some people think families have to look the same on the outside." "Do you think that?" Harlow asked quietly. Teresa turned to look at them, these three children who'd been thrust into her life and turned everything upside down. They were watching her with a mixture of fear and hope that broke her heart. "I think families are made of love," she said. "Everything else is just details." But that night, after the children were in bed, Teresa sat at her kitchen table and wondered if she was doing the right thing. Maybe the critics were right. Maybe these children would be better off with a white family who could give them things she couldn't. Maybe love wasn't enough. She was still sitting there when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Diana appeared in the doorway, clutching a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. "Miss Teresa? I had a bad dream." Teresa's heart clenched. "Come here, baby." Diana climbed into her lap, all knees and elbows and trust. She smelled like the strawberry shampoo Teresa had bought specially for her. "Want to tell me about it? I dreamed that man at the store took us away from you." Teresa held her tighter. "That's not going to happen. Promise." Teresa thought about the temporary custody papers, the social worker visits, the neighbors who watched her every move. She thought about all the ways this could go wrong, all the reasons people thought she shouldn't have these children. Then she looked down at Diana's face, trusting and hopeful despite everything she'd been through. "I promise," Teresa said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "Can I sleep with you tonight?" "Of course you can." As they walked to the bedroom together, Teresa heard Lucas's door creak open. He stood in the hallway, watching them. "You too," Teresa said softly. "If you want." Lucas hesitated, then nodded. Harlow appeared from the girls' room, drawn by some invisible signal. They all piled into Teresa's king-sized bed, the children curled around her like puppies seeking warmth. For the first time since they'd arrived, the house felt like home. "Miss Teresa?" Diana whispered in the darkness. "Yes, baby. I'm glad that man was wrong. I'm glad you get to keep us." The weather forecast had called for light snow, maybe an inch or two. What Memphis got instead was a blizzard that shut down the entire city for 3 days. Teresa woke up Saturday morning to find her windows completely covered with snow, the power lines sagging under the weight of ice, and her house cut off from the world. "Miss Teresa!" Diana's voice carried down the hallway, high with excitement. "Come look outside." Teresa wrapped her robe around herself and padded to the living room, where all three children stood pressed against the front window. The world beyond the glass had transformed overnight into something magical and treacherous. Snow drifted against cars until only their rooftops showed. The street had disappeared entirely under a blanket of white that sparkled in the weak morning light. "I've never seen this much snow," Harlow breathed, her face fogging the glass. "It's like we're in a snow globe," Diana added, bouncing on her toes. Lucas said nothing, but Teresa caught him smiling before he remembered to look sullen again. At 13, he was caught between childhood wonder and teenage cynicism, and the snow had temporarily won. Teresa tried the light switch. Nothing. She picked up the phone. Dead. The radio in the kitchen crackled with static before she found a station broadcasting emergency information. "All roads in Shelby County are impassable," the announcer said. "Residents are advised to stay indoors. Power outages are widespread and may last several days. This is the worst winter storm to hit Memphis in over 50 years." "Are we trapped?" Diana asked, and Teresa heard the edge of panic in her voice. "We're safe," Teresa said quickly. "We have food, We have heat from the gas furnace, and we have each other. It's like camping, but warmer." She hoped she sounded more confident than she felt. The children had only been with her for 6 weeks, and their relationship was still fragile, built on politeness and careful distance. Being trapped together for days could either bring them closer or tear apart the delicate progress they'd made. By noon, the novelty of the snow had worn off and reality set in. No television. No video games. No escape to separate rooms when conversations became uncomfortable. The house felt smaller with 4 people moving around in it, bumping into each other, sharing space they weren't used to sharing. "I'm bored," Diana announced, flopping dramatically on the couch. "We could read," Harlow suggested. "I don't want to read." "We could play cards." "I don't know any card games." Lucas snorted from his corner. "You don't know anything." "Lucas," Teresa warned. "What?" "It's true. She's 8. 8-year-olds are stupid." Diana's face crumpled. "I'm not stupid." "Yes, you are. You can't even tie your shoes right." "That's enough," Teresa said firmly. "Lucas, apologize to your sister." "She's not my sister." The words hung in the air like a slap. Diana started crying, those quiet tears that broke Teresa's heart. Harlow moved to comfort her, shooting Lucas a look that could have melted the snow outside. "She is your sister," Teresa said quietly. "You 3 are family, whether you like it or not." "We're not family," Lucas shot back, his voice cracking. "Families don't get split up and sent to strangers. Families don't die in car crashes and leave their kids with nobody who wants them." Teresa saw the pain behind his anger, the fear that made him lash out at the people closest to him. She'd seen it before in the pediatric ward, children who'd been hurt so badly they couldn't trust kindness. "You're right," she said, and Lucas looked surprised. "Your family did die. And that's not fair, and it's not right, and it hurts more than anything should hurt. But that doesn't mean you can't have a new family. It doesn't mean you have to be alone." "You don't understand," Lucas said, but his voice was smaller now. "Then help me understand." Lucas stared at her for a long moment, then turned away. "Forget it." The afternoon stretched endlessly. Teresa made sandwiches for lunch, but the kitchen felt cramped with all 4 of them in it. Diana spilled her milk and started crying again, convinced she'd be in trouble. Harlow tried to mediate between her siblings, exhausting herself with the effort. Lucas retreated to his room and slammed the door. By evening, Teresa was questioning every decision that had led to this moment. Maybe the critics were right. Maybe she wasn't equipped to handle 3 traumatized children. Maybe love wasn't enough after all. The power had been out for 8 hours when she realized they needed to do something about dinner. The electric stove was useless, but the gas range still worked. She gathered the children in the kitchen. "We're going to cook together," she announced. "On the stovetop. Like pioneers." "I don't know how to cook," Diana said. "Then you'll learn." "Harlow, you can help me with the soup." "Lucas, you're in charge of grilled cheese sandwiches." "Diana, you're the official taste tester." "What if I mess up?" Lucas asked, and Teresa heard the real question underneath. "What if I disappoint you? What if you decide I'm too much trouble?" "Then we'll figure it out together," Teresa said. "That's what families do." They worked in the small kitchen, bumping into each other, laughing when Diana got flour in her hair, cheering when Lucas's first grilled cheese came out perfectly golden. The gas burner cast dancing shadows on the walls, and the smell of tomato soup filled the air. "This is good," Diana said, taking a careful sip of soup. "It's better than good," Harlow added. "It's perfect." Even Lucas smiled, just a little. After dinner, they moved to the living room. Teresa had found candles and flashlights, creating a warm circle of light in the darkness. The house creaked around them, settling under the weight of snow and ice. "Tell us about your husband," Harlow said suddenly. "Jerome. What was he like?" Teresa felt the familiar stab of grief, but it was softer now, mixed with something that might have been healing. He was kind and funny. He could make me laugh even when I was having the worst day. "How did you meet him?" Diana asked, curling up next to Teresa on the couch. "At the hospital. I was a new nurse, and he came in with a broken arm. He'd fallen off a ladder trying to hang Christmas lights for his elderly neighbor. I thought anyone that thoughtful had to be worth knowing." "Did you love him right away?" Harlow wanted to know. Teresa smiled. "I thought he was cute. Love came later, after I realized he was the kind of man who would drive across town to bring me soup when I had the flu, even though we'd only been dating for 2 weeks. I wish I could have met him," Diana said softly. "He would have loved you," Teresa said, and meant it. "All of you. He always wanted children." "Why didn't you have any?" Lucas asked, then immediately looked like he regretted the question. Teresa was quiet for a moment, deciding how much truth these children could handle. "We tried. For a long time. But sometimes things don't work out the way you plan." "Like our parents dying," Harlow said. "Yes. Like that." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the candle flames dance. Outside, the wind howled and snow continued to fall, but inside they were warm and safe. "Tell us about them," Teresa said gently. "Your parents. What were they like?" The children exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. "Mom made the best chocolate chip cookies," Diana said finally. "She always let me lick the spoon. Dad taught me how to throw a curveball," Lucas added, his voice soft with memory. "He said I had natural talent." "They read to us every night," Harlow said. "Even when we got older. Mom would do all the voices, and Dad would make sound effects." "They sound wonderful," Teresa said. "They were," Lucas said, and for the first time since she'd known him, his voice wasn't angry. "Just sad." "I'm scared I'll forget them," Diana whispered. "You won't," Teresa promised. "Love doesn't disappear just because someone dies. It stays with you forever." "How do you know?" Lucas asked. "Because I still love Jerome, even though he's gone. And you'll always love your parents, even though they can't be here with you." "But what if we love you too?" Diana asked, the question so quiet Teresa almost missed it. "Is that okay?" Teresa felt her throat close up. "Oh, baby. Of course it's okay. Love isn't like pie. You don't run out of pieces. The more you give away, the more you have." "Really?" Diana asked. "Really?" Lucas was staring at the candle flame, his face thoughtful. "At the last foster home, they said we had to choose. Love them or keep missing our parents. They said we couldn't do both." "They were wrong," Teresa said firmly. "You can love your parents and miss them and still have room in your hearts for new people. Love makes room for itself. Even if we're different colors?" Harlow asked. Teresa looked at these 3 children, their faces golden in the candlelight, and felt something shift in her chest. Not the sharp pain of loss she'd carried since Jerome's death, but something warmer, something that felt like hope. "Especially then," she said. "Love doesn't see color. It just sees hearts that need each other." Diana yawned, a jaw-cracking yawn that made them all laugh. "Time for bed," Teresa said. "Can we sleep out here?" Diana asked. "By the fire. Like camping." Teresa looked around the living room, at the candles and the blankets and the 3 children who were slowly, carefully, beginning to trust her. "I think that's a perfect idea," she said. They made a nest of blankets and pillows on the floor. Diana curled up between Teresa and Harlow. Lucas lay a little apart, but close enough that Teresa could reach out and touch his shoulder. "Miss Teresa?" Diana whispered in the darkness. "Yes, baby. I think I might want to call you Mama Teresa. Is that okay?" Teresa's eyes filled with tears. "That's more than okay. That's perfect. Mama Teresa, Diana repeated, testing the words. I like how that sounds. In the darkness, Teresa heard Lucas shift closer, felt Harlow's hand find hers. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, something new was being born. Something that looked like family. Spring had arrived in Memphis with a vengeance, bringing thunderstorms that rattled the windows and sent Diana scrambling into Teresa's bed most nights. The children had been with her for 4 months now, and the temporary custody arrangement was becoming something more permanent. The social worker, Mrs. Rodriguez, had started using words like adoption during her monthly visits. Lucas was in the attic, supposedly looking for his baseball glove but really avoiding his math homework, when he found the photo albums. They were tucked away in a corner behind Christmas decorations, covered with a layer of dust that suggested they hadn't been touched in years. He opened the first album without thinking, expecting to find pictures of Teresa and Jerome's wedding, maybe some vacation photos. Instead, he found something that made his chest tight with recognition and pain. Hospital bracelets. Tiny ones, the kind they put on newborn babies. 3 of them, carefully preserved behind plastic sheets. Each one had Teresa's name and a date, but no baby's name. Just Baby Owen, written in fading ink. Lucas turned the page and found ultrasound photos. Grainy black and white images that showed the shadowy outline of babies who would never take their first breath. There were doctor's notes, appointment cards, sympathy cards from friends and family. An entire album dedicated to children who had existed only in hope and heartbreak. Lucas. Teresa's voice drifted up from downstairs. Dinner's ready. He should have put the album back. Should have pretended he'd never seen it. But something compelled him to keep looking, to understand the woman who had taken them in when no one else would. The second album was worse. It contained photos of a nursery, painted yellow and filled with furniture that had never been used. There were baby clothes with tags still attached, toys that had never been played with, a rocking chair that had never rocked a child to sleep. The third album was the hardest to look at. It showed Teresa and Jerome at the hospital, Teresa's face pale and drawn, Jerome's arm around her shoulders. There were flowers from well-wishers, cards that said, "Sorry for your loss," and a single photo of Teresa holding a bundle of blankets that Lucas realized must have contained one of the babies they'd lost. Lucas. Teresa called again, her voice sharper now. Come eat. He closed the albums and climbed down from the attic, his mind reeling. All this time, he'd thought Teresa had taken them in out of pity or some misguided sense of charity. He'd never considered that she might need them as much as they needed her. Dinner was tense. Lucas picked at his food, lost in thought. Diana chattered about her day at school, and Harlow helped Teresa serve dessert, but Lucas couldn't focus on any of it. All he could think about were those tiny hospital bracelets, those empty baby clothes. After dinner, while Teresa was washing dishes and the girls were watching television, Lucas found himself standing in the doorway of what had once been Jerome's study but was now his bedroom. Teresa had converted it for him without fanfare, moving Jerome's desk to the basement and painting over the dark wood paneling with a cheerful blue that Lucas had picked out himself. He'd never thought about what this room had been before. Never wondered why Teresa had chosen to give him this particular space. Now he understood. This had been meant to be a nursery. This room had been waiting for 20 years for a child to fill it. You're quiet tonight, Teresa said, appearing in the doorway with a basket of clean laundry. I found something in the attic, Lucas said without preamble. Teresa went very still. What kind of something? Photo albums. With hospital bracelets. And pictures of a nursery. Teresa set down the laundry basket and sat on the edge of his bed. For a long moment, she didn't speak. I should have put those away, she said finally. Why didn't you tell us? Tell you what? That you lost babies. That you wanted children but couldn't have them. Teresa's hands twisted in her lap. It didn't seem relevant. Didn't seem relevant? Lucas's voice rose. You took in 3 kids after losing 3 babies and you don't think that's relevant? Keep your voice down, Teresa said quietly. Your sisters don't need to hear this." But it was too late. Harlow appeared in the doorway, her face curious and concerned. Diana was right behind her, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Hear what?" Harlow asked. Lucas looked at Teresa, waiting to see if she would tell them or if he would have to. Teresa sighed and patted the bed beside her. "Come sit down, girls. There's something I should have told you a long time ago." They gathered on the bed, Diana curling up against Teresa's side, Harlow sitting cross-legged, Lucas remaining standing by the window. "Before you came to live with me, Jerome and I tried to have children," Teresa began. "For 15 years we tried. I got pregnant 3 times, but each time, something went wrong. The babies died before they could be born." Diana's eyes went wide. "That's so sad." "It was," Teresa agreed. "It was the saddest thing that ever happened to us. We had a nursery ready, and baby clothes, and so much love with nowhere to put it." "Is that why you took us?" Harlow asked quietly. Teresa was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "I took you because you needed a home and I had one to give. But yes, I think maybe God knew we needed each other." "You could have had your own babies," Lucas said, his voice hard. "Real babies. Instead you got stuck with us." Teresa stood up so quickly that Diana tumbled sideways on the bed. She crossed to where Lucas stood and took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Don't you ever say that again," she said fiercely. "Don't you ever call yourselves anything less than real. You are my children. Not by blood, maybe, but by choice. And choice is stronger than blood any day. But if you could have had your own—" "I did have my own," Teresa interrupted. "I have you. All 3 of you. You think love is less real because it doesn't come from biology? You think the sleepless nights I spent when Diana had pneumonia don't count because I didn't give birth to her? You think the pride I felt when Harlow won the spelling bee is somehow fake because she doesn't have my DNA?" Lucas felt tears burning his eyes. I thought maybe you regretted it. Taking us. We're so much trouble, and we don't even look like you, and people stare." "Let them stare," Teresa said. "Let them wonder. Let them judge. I know who my family is." "Really?" Diana asked in a small voice. "Really," Teresa confirmed. "You want to know something? Those babies I lost? I loved them, and I grieved for them, and I always will. But they led me to you. If things had been different, if I'd had biological children, I might never have been at that community center the day Diana was choking. I might never have met you. And that would have been the real tragedy." Harlow was crying now, quiet tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand. "We love you too, Mama Teresa." It was the first time Harlow had called her Mama, and Teresa felt her heart expand in her chest. "I know you do, baby. I know." Lucas finally broke, the tears he'd been holding back for months spilling over. Teresa pulled him into her arms, and he let her, burying his face against her shoulder. "I'm sorry," he sobbed. "I'm sorry I've been so mean to you. I was just scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared you'd change your mind. Scared you'd decide we were too much work and send us back." Teresa held him tighter. "That's never going to happen. You hear me? Never. Promise. I promise." They stayed like that for a long time, the 4 of them tangled together on Lucas's bed. Outside, thunder rumbled and rain pelted the windows, but inside they were safe and warm and finally, truly, a family. "Mama Teresa?" Diana said eventually. "Yes, baby. Can we see the pictures? Of the babies you lost?" Teresa hesitated. "Are you sure? They might make you sad." "We want to see them," Harlow said. "They're part of our family too, aren't they? Even though they're in heaven." Teresa smiled through her tears. "Yes, they are." So they went up to the attic together, and Teresa showed them the albums she'd hidden away. She told them about each pregnancy, each loss, each hope that had been shattered. The children listened with the solemnity of those who understood grief intimately. "What were you going to name them?" Lucas asked. "The first one was going to be Jerome Jr. if it was a boy, or Jerica if it was a girl. The second one we were going to call Hope. The third—" Teresa's voice caught. "The third one we never got to name. We lost that baby too early. Can we name them now?" Diana asked. "The third baby?" Teresa looked surprised. "You want to do that?" "Yes. So they have a name. So they're not just the baby we lost." Teresa thought about it. "What name do you think?" The children looked at each other, that silent communication passing between them again. "Angel," Harlow said finally. "Because they're watching over us from heaven." "Angel," Teresa repeated. "I like that. Angel Owen." "Angel Owen," Diana said solemnly. "Our sister in heaven." And somehow, in that dusty attic surrounded by the remnants of old grief, they became more than just a family thrown together by circumstance. They became a family bound by understanding, by shared loss, by the knowledge that love could grow in the most unexpected places. "Come on," Teresa said finally. "Let's go make some hot chocolate. And tomorrow, we'll start planning how to make this adoption official." "Official?" Lucas asked. "Official," Teresa confirmed. "If you want to be Owens instead of Barnett's, that is." The children looked at each other again, and this time their smiles were radiant. "We want to," Harlow said. "We really, really want to." As they climbed down from the attic, Teresa felt Jerome's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. He would have loved these children, she knew. He would have been so proud of the family they'd built together. Sometimes the most beautiful families are born from the ashes of loss. The adoption papers had been finalized 2 years ago, but Teresa still kept them framed on the mantelpiece next to the family photos that now filled every surface of the house. Lucas Owen, 16 now and taller than Teresa, was captain of the baseball team. Harlow Owen, 14, had just started high school with a full scholarship to the private academy across town. Diana Owen, 12, was all legs and braces and dreams of becoming a veterinarian. They were the Owen family now, officially and completely, and Teresa had never been happier. "Mama T, I need help with my hair," called Keisha from the bathroom. She was Diana's best friend, a girl from down the street who had practically moved in over the summer. Teresa had taught her how to braid her thick black hair into intricate patterns, and now Keisha refused to let anyone else touch it. "Coming, baby," Teresa called back, wiping her hands on her apron. Sunday dinner was in the oven, and the house smelled like roast chicken and cornbread. It was their tradition now, every Sunday at 2 o'clock. The whole family gathered around the dining room table, plus whoever else happened to be there. Teresa's house had become the neighborhood gathering place, the safe haven where kids came when they needed a meal or a listening ear or just a place to belong. In the bathroom, Teresa found Keisha sitting on the closed toilet seat while Diana attempted to French braid her hair. "I can't get it right," Diana said, frustrated. "It keeps coming loose." "Here, let me show you again," Teresa said, taking the comb. Her hands moved with practiced ease, sectioning and weaving until Keisha's hair lay in perfect plaits down her back. "How do you make it look so easy?" Diana asked. "Practice, baby. Lots and lots of practice. Will you teach me to do yours?" Keisha asked, looking at Teresa's hair in the mirror. Teresa smiled. "If you want to learn." It had taken time, but the neighborhood had eventually accepted their unusual family. The whispers had died down, replaced by respect for the woman who opened her home to any child who needed it. Teresa's house was where kids came for help with homework, where teenagers brought their relationship problems, where young mothers sought advice about raising their babies. "Mama, phone!" Lucas called from the kitchen. Teresa found him holding the cordless phone, his hand over the mouthpiece. "It's Coach Williams. He wants to talk to you about the scholarship thing." Teresa took the phone, her heart racing. Lucas had been scouted by several colleges for baseball, but the University of Tennessee had been his dream school since he was 10 years old. "Mrs. Owen, this is Coach Williams from UT. I have some good news about Lucas." 20 minutes later, Teresa hung up the phone with tears in her eyes. Lucas was watching her face, trying to read her expression. "Well," he asked. "Full ride," Teresa said simply. 4 years, everything paid for. Lucas hooped so loud that Harlow came running from her room, Diana and Keisha close behind. "What's happening?" Harlow demanded. "Lucas got the scholarship," Teresa announced, and the kitchen erupted in cheers and hugs and happy tears. "I can't believe it," Lucas said, his voice shaky. "I actually did it." "We always knew you would," Teresa said, pulling him into a fierce hug. "We never doubted it for a second." Later that evening, after dinner and dishes and homework, Teresa found herself alone with Lucas on the front porch. He was leaving for college in less than a year, and she was trying not to think about how quiet the house would be without his laughter filling it. "Scared?" she asked, settling into the porch swing beside him. "Terrified," he admitted. "What if I'm not good enough? What if I get there and realize I don't belong?" Teresa looked at this young man who had been so angry and broken when she first met him, now confident and kind and ready to take on the world. "You belong wherever you choose to be," she said. "Don't let anyone tell you different. Even at a fancy college where most of the kids come from money? Especially there. You've got something they don't have." "What's that?" "You know what it's like to lose everything and build it back up again. You know the value of hard work and family and never giving up. That's worth more than all the money in the world." Lucas was quiet for a moment, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "I used to hate you," he said suddenly. Teresa wasn't surprised. "I know. Not because you were black. Well, maybe a little, at first. But mostly because you made me hope again, and I didn't want to hope. Hope hurt too much. And now I can't imagine my life without you. Without this family. You saved us, Mama T. You saved all of us." Teresa felt tears prick her eyes. "You saved me too, baby. You gave me a reason to keep going when I thought my life was over." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the night. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. A car door slammed. Normal sounds of normal life in a normal family. "Mama T," Lucas said eventually. When I have kids someday, I want to be the kind of parent you are. The kind who loves without conditions." Teresa squeezed his hand. "You will be. I know you will." The next few months passed in a blur of college preparations and family milestones. Harlow made honor roll again and was elected student body president. Diana started her period and came to Teresa in tears, convinced she was dying until Teresa explained what was happening and held her while she cried from relief and embarrassment. "Am I a woman now?" Diana asked, curled up in Teresa's lap despite being almost as tall as her mother. "You're becoming one," Teresa said carefully. "But there's no rush. You can take your time." "Did your mama tell you about this stuff?" Teresa smiled. "My mama told me I was cursed by God for being a sinful girl. It took me years to understand that wasn't true." "That's awful." "It was. But it taught me to do better with my own daughters." Diana looked up at her with those blue eyes that still reminded Teresa of the frightened little girl who had choked on cornbread all those years ago. "I'm glad you're my mama," she said simply. "I'm glad you're my daughter." Spring brought Lucas's graduation and prom and a dozen other senior year traditions that Teresa documented with hundreds of photographs. She watched him walk across the stage to receive his diploma and felt her heart swell with pride. This boy who had been so lost, so angry, was now a young man ready to take on the world. The graduation party was held in their backyard, with half the neighborhood in attendance. Teresa watched Lucas laugh with his friends, pose for pictures with his sisters, and accept congratulations from teachers and coaches and family friends. He belonged here, in this community they had built together. "You did good, Teresa," said Mrs. Rodriguez, the social worker who had overseen their adoption. She was retired now, but she still kept in touch with the families she had helped create. "We all did good," Teresa corrected. "It was a team effort. Not everyone could have done what you did. Taking in 3 traumatized children, dealing with all the prejudice and judgment, building a family from scratch. It takes a special kind of love." Teresa looked around at her backyard full of people celebrating her son's achievement. Lucas was teaching some of the younger kids how to throw a curveball. Harlow was helping serve cake to the elderly neighbors who had come to show their support. Diana was running around with a pack of kids, her laughter bright and carefree. "It's not special," Teresa said. "It's just love. Plain and simple." That night, after the last guest had gone home and the dishes were washed and put away, the family gathered in the living room for their traditional end-of-day check-in. It was something they had started when the children were small, a time to share the best and worst parts of their day. "Best part of today was seeing Lucas graduate," Harlow said. "Worst part was realizing he's really leaving for college." "Best part was the cake," Diana said. "Worst part was when Tommy Henderson put ice cream in my hair." "Best part was having all our friends and family here to celebrate," Lucas said. "Worst part is knowing this is probably the last time we'll all be together like this for a while." They all looked at Teresa, waiting for her turn. "Best part was watching my son graduate and knowing that all 3 of my children are going to be okay in this world," she said. "Worst part is that there wasn't a worst part. Today was perfect." "Even when Mrs. Caldwell asked if you were proud of your foster kids?" Harlow asked with a grin. Teresa laughed. "Even then. Especially when I got to correct her and say they're not my foster kids, they're my kids. Period." "We love you, Mama T," Diana said, crawling into Teresa's lap despite being 12 years old and far too big for lap-sitting. "I love you too, baby girl. I love all of you more than words can say." As they headed off to bed, Teresa felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. They had built something beautiful together, this family of theirs. Something that had started with tragedy and loss but had grown into joy and love and belonging. She had no way of knowing that in just a few years, everything would change. That the family she had fought so hard to build would face its greatest test yet. That the love they had created would be the only thing standing between her and a death sentence she didn't deserve. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, they were just a family celebrating their victories and planning for a future that seemed bright and full of promise. Diana Wallace scrolled through her phone during her lunch break at the Memphis Children's Advocacy Center, where she worked as a senior social worker. At 38, she had inherited Teresa's fierce protectiveness and her gift for making broken children feel safe. Her office walls were covered with drawings from kids she'd helped, thank you cards from families she'd reunited, and a framed photo of her adoptive mother at her college graduation. The news alert popped up just as she was finishing her sandwich. Memphis woman sentenced to death for murder of prominent businessman. Diana almost scrolled past it. Crime stories were depressing, and she dealt with enough tragedy in her daily work. But something made her pause. Maybe the mention of Memphis, maybe just idle curiosity. She tapped the link. The photo that loaded made her drop her phone. Teresa Owen, 82, had been sentenced to death for the murder of Jerome Fitzgerald, a wealthy real estate developer who had died from cyanide poisoning at a charity dinner she had catered. The article was brief but damning. Security footage showed Teresa serving Fitzgerald personally. Witnesses testified to a heated argument between them weeks before his death. Chemical residue had been found in her catering van. Diana's hands shook as she read the details. The trial had been swift, the evidence seemingly overwhelming. Teresa had been convicted 3 weeks ago and was currently housed on death row at the Tennessee Prison for Women in Nashville, awaiting execution scheduled for November 15th. 34 days away. Diana's vision blurred. She read the article again, certain she was misunderstanding something. This couldn't be real. Teresa Owen couldn't be the same Teresa Owen who had raised her, who had never hurt a fly, who still fed stray cats and volunteered at the homeless shelter every Thursday. But the photo was unmistakable. Older, grayer, but definitely her mother. With trembling fingers, Diana called Lucas. He was a federal prosecutor in Washington, D.C. now, married with 2 kids, successful beyond anything they could have imagined when they were children. He would know what to do. "Diana, what's wrong? You sound terrible." "Lucas, I need you to sit down. I'm in court in 20 minutes. Can this wait?" "No, it can't." "Lucas, Mama T has been arrested. For murder. She's on death row." The silence stretched so long that Diana thought the call had dropped. "That's impossible," Lucas said finally. "I'm looking at the news article right now. Jerome Fitzgerald. Ring any bells?" Another pause. "Fitzgerald. Why does that name sound familiar?" "I don't know, but we need to get to Nashville. Now." "Diana, slow down. This has to be a mistake. Some kind of mix-up. The photo is her, Lucas. It's definitely her. And the execution is scheduled for November 15th. Jesus Christ." Diana heard papers rustling, a door closing. "Okay, I'm calling Harlow. We'll meet you in Nashville tonight." Diana hung up and immediately called her supervisor, explaining that she had a family emergency and needed immediate leave. Then she threw her things into her car and started the 3-hour drive to Nashville, her mind racing with questions that had no answers. How long had Teresa been in jail? Why hadn't she called them? How had they not known about any of this? The Tennessee Prison for Women sat like a concrete fortress outside Nashville, surrounded by razor wire and guard towers. Diana had visited prisons before in her work, but never as a family member of an inmate. Never to see someone she loved behind bars. The visiting process was humiliating. Strip searches, metal detectors, forms to fill out in triplicate. Diana sat in the sterile waiting room for 2 hours before a guard finally called her name. "Owen. Teresa. You've got 15 minutes. Teresa appeared on the other side of the reinforced glass, looking smaller than Diana remembered. Her hair had gone completely gray, and she wore an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on her diminished frame. But her eyes were the same, warm and kind and full of love. "Diana, baby, what are you doing here?" Teresa's voice came through the phone receiver, tinny and distant. "What am I doing here? Mama, what are you doing here? Why didn't you call us?" Teresa's face crumpled. "I didn't want you to know. I didn't want you children to have to deal with this shame." "Shame? Mama, you're innocent. You have to be innocent." "Of course I'm innocent. But that doesn't seem to matter much." Diana pressed her palm against the glass. "Tell me what happened. All of it." Teresa took a shaky breath. "Jerome Fitzgerald hired me to cater a charity dinner at the Peabody Hotel. It was a big event, lots of important people. I'd catered for him before, smaller events. He always paid well, never any problems. But 3 weeks before the dinner, he came to my house. Said he'd been doing some research into my background. Said he knew about you children, about the adoption. He said there were irregularities in the paperwork, that maybe the state would be interested to know that a black woman had somehow managed to adopt 3 white children back in the 90s. Diana felt ice in her veins. "He was threatening you. He wanted money. Said if I paid him $50,000, he'd keep quiet about his suspicions. If I didn't, he'd make sure the state investigated the adoption, maybe even reversed it. But we're adults now. The adoption can't be reversed." "I know that. You know that. But Jerome Fitzgerald was a powerful man with connections everywhere. He could have made our lives very difficult. Could have ruined your careers, Lucas's especially. A federal prosecutor whose adoption was under investigation? That would have been front-page news." Diana understood now why the name had sounded familiar to Lucas. Jerome Fitzgerald had been a major political donor, The kind of man who appeared in newspaper society pages and had buildings named after him. So what did you do? I told him to go to hell. Said I had nothing to hide, that our family was built on love, and that was all that mattered. He laughed and said we'd see about that. And then he died at the dinner I catered. Cyanide poisoning. The police found traces of it in my van, on my serving utensils. They said I had motive because of the argument witnesses saw us having. They said I had opportunity because I served him personally. They said I had means because I had access to cleaning supplies that contained cyanide. But you didn't do it. Of course I didn't do it. But my lawyer was court-appointed, overworked, and not particularly interested in fighting for an elderly black woman accused of killing a prominent white businessman. The trial lasted 4 days. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. Diana felt sick. Why didn't you call us? We could have helped. Lucas could have found you a better lawyer. And ruin his career. Have him associated with a murder case? No, baby. I've spent 30 years protecting you children. I wasn't going to stop now. Protecting us? Mama, you're going to die in 3 weeks. Teresa's eyes filled with tears. I know. And I've made my peace with that. I've had a good life. I got to raise 3 beautiful children and see them become successful, happy adults. That's more than a lot of people get. No. Diana's voice was fierce. No, you don't get to give up. We're going to fight this. We're going to prove you're innocent. Diana, honey, it's too late. The appeals have been exhausted. The governor denied clemency. It's over. It's not over until it's over. Lucas is on his way. So is Harlow. We're going to figure this out. Teresa smiled through her tears. My stubborn children. I should have known you wouldn't let this go. You raised us to fight for what's right. You raised us to never give up on family. Did you think we'd start now? The guard appeared behind Teresa. Time's up. I love you, Mama, Diana said quickly. We're going to fix this. I love you too, baby girl. But don't sacrifice your lives for mine. Promise me. I'm not promising anything except that we're going to bring you home. Diana watched Teresa being led away, her heart breaking at how frail and defeated her mother looked. But underneath the heartbreak was something else. Anger. Determination. The same fierce protectiveness that Teresa had shown them as children. Outside the prison, Diana called Lucas again. How is she? He asked immediately. Scared. Resigned. Ready to die rather than let us risk our careers helping her. Like hell. I'm driving through the night. I'll be there by morning. Lucas, there's something else. The victim, Jerome Fitzgerald. He was blackmailing her, threatening to have our adoption investigated. The silence was longer this time. When Lucas spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. Jerome Fitzgerald. Son of a bitch. You know him. I know of him. Diana, Jerome Fitzgerald was the drunk driver who killed our parents. The words hit Diana like a physical blow. What? He was never charged. Too connected, too powerful. But I've never forgotten his name. I've been waiting 30 years for a chance to make him pay for what he did to our family. And now he's dead. And now Mama T is going to die for a crime she didn't commit, killed by the same man who destroyed our first family. Diana closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 30 years of injustice pressing down on her. Not if we can help it, she said. We've got 34 days to prove her innocence. Then we better get started. As Diana drove back toward Memphis to pack for an extended stay in Nashville, she thought about the woman who had saved 3 broken children and turned them into a family. Teresa had fought for them when no one else would. Now it was their turn to fight for her. The race against time had begun. Sometimes the people who save us need saving in return. Lucas Owen arrived at the Hampton Inn near the prison at 6 in the morning. his eyes bloodshot from driving through the night. He'd called in every favor he had to clear his schedule for the next month, telling his supervisor at the Department of Justice that he had a family emergency that required his immediate attention. He hadn't mentioned that the emergency involved his adoptive mother being on death row. Diana was waiting in the lobby with coffee and a stack of legal documents she'd somehow obtained overnight. "How did you get the trial transcripts?" Lucas asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I called in a favor from a lawyer friend." "Lucas, this case is a joke. The evidence is all circumstantial. The defense attorney barely put up a fight." "What about appeals?" "One appeal to the state Supreme Court. Denied." The lawyer filed it 3 days before the deadline with about as much effort as a high school book report. Lucas flipped through the transcripts, his prosecutors' eye immediately spotting the weaknesses in the case. "This is sloppy work. Where's the forensic evidence? Where are the character witnesses? Where's the investigation into other suspects? That's what I want to know. And Lucas, there's something else. I did some digging into Jerome Fitzgerald last night." "What kind of digging?" "The kind that shows he had a lot of enemies. 3 pending lawsuits, 2 bitter business partners, and a daughter who stood to inherit $50 million when he died." Lucas looked up sharply. "A daughter?" "Peyton Fitzgerald Thomas. 35 years old, recently divorced, heavily in debt from a failed art gallery. She was at the charity dinner that night." "And the police didn't investigate her?" "Apparently not. Once they found the cyanide residue in Mama T's van, they stopped looking for other suspects." Harlow arrived an hour later, having taken the first flight from Boston, where she worked as a pediatric surgeon at Children's Hospital. At 40, she was the most successful of the 3 siblings, but she looked exhausted and worried as she hugged her brother and sister in the hotel lobby. "I can't believe this is happening," she said. "I can't believe she didn't call us." "She was trying to protect us," Diana said. "Same as always." "Well, she's not protecting us anymore. I've taken a leave of absence. I'm here until this is resolved." Lucas spread the case files across a table in the hotel's business center. "Okay, here's what we know. Mama T catered a charity dinner at the Peabody Hotel on September 15th. Jerome Fitzgerald died from cyanide poisoning sometime between 8 and 10 p.m. The prosecution's case rests on 3 things: motive, opportunity, and means. "Motive being the blackmail," Harlow said. "Right. Fitzgerald was threatening to expose supposed irregularities in our adoption. Opportunity because Mama T served him personally. And means because they found cyanide residue in her catering van." "But cyanide is in a lot of cleaning products," Diana pointed out. "Any caterer would have access to it." "That's what a competent defense attorney would have argued. But look at this." Lucas pulled out a document. The defense called exactly 3 witnesses. No forensic experts, no character witnesses, no alternative suspects. "It's like he wanted to lose. Or like he was paid to lose," Harlow said grimly. They spent the morning at the prison, meeting with Teresa together for the first time in 2 years. She looked even frielier than she had the day before, but her eyes lit up when she saw all 3 of her children. "My babies," she whispered through the phone. "You shouldn't be here. You should be living your lives." "Our lives include you," Lucas said firmly. "Now we need you to tell us everything about Jerome Fitzgerald. Every interaction you ever had with him." Teresa sighed. "I first met him about 5 years ago. He hired me to cater a small dinner party at his house. Maybe 20 people. He was polite, paid promptly, recommended me to his friends. Over the years, I probably catered a dozen events for him." "When did things change?" Harlow asked. "About 6 months ago. He started asking personal questions. About you children, about how I'd managed to adopt you. At first, I thought he was just curious. But then the questions got more pointed. More invasive." "What kind of questions?" Diana pressed. He wanted to know about the social workers involved, the judges who signed the papers, whether I'd paid anyone to expedite the process. I told him everything was legal and above board, but he kept pushing. And then came the blackmail attempt, Lucas said. 3 weeks before the charity dinner. He showed up at my house with a folder full of documents. Copies of our adoption papers, newspaper clippings about interracial adoption controversies from the 90s, even photos of you children from your school yearbooks. Harlow felt sick. He'd been investigating us for months. He said he had connections in the state government who would be very interested in reviewing the case. Said it would be a shame if Lucas's career was derailed by questions about his background. Son of a bitch, Lucas muttered. Language, Teresa said automatically, and despite everything, they all smiled. What did you tell him? Diana asked. I told him that our family was built on love, not money, and that he could take his threats and shove them where the sun doesn't shine. And how did he react? He laughed. Said I'd regret not taking his offer. Said he'd make sure everyone knew what kind of woman I really was. What did he mean by that? Harlow asked. Teresa was quiet for a moment. I think he was going to claim that I'd somehow manipulated the system. That a black woman in 1994 couldn't have legally adopted 3 white children without some kind of corruption or fraud. But that's ridiculous, Diana said. We have all the paperwork. Everything was legal. Legal doesn't matter when you're dealing with someone like Jerome Fitzgerald. He had the money and connections to make life very difficult for us, even if his claims were baseless. After the visit, the siblings regrouped at the hotel. Lucas was pacing, his prosecutor's mind working through the case. We need to find out who really killed Fitzgerald, he said. And we need to do it in 32 days. Where do we start? Harlow asked. With the daughter, Peyton Thomas. If she inherited $50 million, that's a hell of a motive. Diana pulled out her laptop. I've been researching her. She was drowning in debt. Her art gallery failed last year, and she owed creditors over $2 million. Her divorce settlement was tied up in court, and her ex-husband was fighting her for custody of their kids. So she needed money fast, Lucas said. And she was at the dinner that night. I found the guest list. She was seated at table 3, about 20 feet from where her father was sitting. Did she have access to his food? That's what we need to find out. But Lucas, there's something else. I found her social media posts from that night. Look at this. Diana turned her laptop screen toward them. It showed a Facebook post from Peyton Thomas, timestamped at 9:47 p.m. on September 15th. Finally free to live my own life. Some chapters have to end for new ones to begin. She posted that less than an hour after her father died, Harlow said. Before anyone even knew he was dead, Lucas added. The body wasn't discovered until after 10 p.m. They stared at the screen, the implications sinking in. We need to talk to her, Diana said. No, Lucas said firmly. I need to talk to her. You two need to stay out of this. If this goes wrong, I don't want you implicated. Like hell, Harlow said. We're in this together. Harlow, you're a surgeon. Diana, you work with children. You can't afford to be associated with a murder investigation. But I'm already a prosecutor. This is what I do. Lucas, you could lose your job, Diana pointed out. I don't care. Mama T is more important than my career. She wouldn't want you to sacrifice everything for her, Harlow said. Then she shouldn't have sacrificed everything for us, Lucas replied. Look, I've already made my choice. I'm taking a leave of absence from the Justice Department. I'm going to represent Mama T myself. You can't represent her. You're not licensed to practice in Tennessee. Then I'll get licensed. Or I'll work with a local attorney. But I'm not letting some overworked public defender handle this case. Diana looked at her brother, seeing the determination in his eyes that reminded her so much of Teresa. "What do you need us to do?" "I need you to go back to your lives. Let me handle this." "No," Harlow said. "We're family. We stick together. That's what Mama T taught us." "Harlow." "Don't Harlow me. I'm taking a leave of absence too." "Diana." "Already done. I'm not going anywhere." Lucas looked at his sisters, these women who had been through so much with him, who had helped him become the man he was today. He thought about Teresa, sitting in that cell, ready to die rather than let them risk their futures for her. "Okay," he said finally. "But we do this smart. We do this legal. And if it looks like we're going to lose, you two walk away. Promise me." "We promise," Diana said, though they all knew it was a lie. "All right then," Lucas said, pulling out his phone. "Let's go save our mother." As he dialed the number for the Tennessee Bar Association to begin the process of getting licensed to practice law in the state, Lucas thought about the woman who had saved 3 broken children 30 years ago. She had fought for them when no one else would. She had given them a family, a future, a chance at happiness. Now it was their turn to fight for her. The clock was ticking, but the Owen family had never backed down from a fight. And they weren't about to start now. Sometimes love means risking everything for the people who matter most. 5 days before Teresa's scheduled execution, Lucas Owen stood in the Davidson County Courthouse holding a manila folder that contained either salvation or their last hope. He'd been granted emergency admission to the Tennessee Bar 3 weeks earlier, a process that normally took months but had been expedited due to the extraordinary circumstances and his federal prosecutor credentials. The past month had been a whirlwind of investigation, legal filings, and sleepless nights. Diana had used her social work connections to track down witnesses the original defense had never interviewed. Harlow had consulted with forensic experts to challenge the timeline of the poisoning. And Lucas had done what he did best, built a case. "Are you ready for this?" Diana asked, adjusting her navy blue dress. She'd lost 15 pounds in the past month from stress and barely eating. "As ready as we can be," Lucas replied, though his hands shook slightly as he gripped the folder. Harlow appeared beside them, having just finished a phone call with the forensic toxicologist who would be their star witness. Dr. Martinez confirmed he can testify that the cyanide levels in Fitzgerald's system indicate he was poisoned at least 2 hours before Mama T served him dinner. That puts the time of poisoning between 6 and 7 p.m., when she was still at home preparing food. "And Peyton Thomas?" Diana asked. "Had access to her father's private office from 5 to 6:30 p.m., according to the security guard we finally tracked down. The same security guard the original investigation never bothered to interview." They walked into the courthouse together, past reporters who had been following the case since Lucas filed his motion for a new trial. The story had captured national attention. A federal prosecutor risking his career to save his black adoptive mother from death row 30 years after she'd saved him and his sisters from the foster system. Judge Patricia Hendricks was known for being tough but fair. She'd agreed to hear their motion despite the late filing, partly because of the new evidence they'd uncovered and partly because the original trial had been so obviously inadequate. "Your Honor," Lucas began, standing at the defense table where Teresa sat beside him in a borrowed dress that Diana had brought from home. "We're here today because the state of Tennessee is about to execute an innocent woman based on a fundamentally flawed investigation and an incompetent defense." District Attorney Robert Kane, who was prosecuting the case personally due to the media attention, objected immediately. "Your Honor, this is a desperate attempt to relitigate a case that was properly tried and decided by a jury." "Mr. Kane, you'll have your chance to respond," Judge Hendricks said. "Mr. Owen, proceed." Lucas opened his folder and pulled out the first piece of evidence. "Your Honor, the prosecution's case rested on 3 pillars: motive, opportunity, and means. We're here to show that all 3 pillars are built on sand." He walked to the evidence table and picked up a photograph. "This is Peyton Fitzgerald Thomas, the victim's daughter, taken at the charity dinner on the night her father died. Note the timestamp, 6:15 p.m. She's in her father's private office at the Peabody Hotel, alone, with access to his personal effects, including the antique silver flask he carried everywhere. Objection, Kane said. This photo wasn't part of the original evidence. Because the original investigation never looked for it, Lucas replied. We obtained it from the hotel's security system, which the police never bothered to check. Judge Hendricks studied the photo. I'll allow it. Continue, Mr. Owen. Dr. Martinez, our forensic toxicologist, will testify that based on the concentration of cyanide in Mr. Fitzgerald's blood, he was poisoned between 6 and 7 p.m. At that time, my client was at her home on Avalon Street, 30 minutes away, preparing food for the dinner. She didn't arrive at the hotel until 7:30. Lucas pulled out another document. This is Ms. Thomas's financial records, which show she was over $2 million in debt at the time of her father's death. Her art gallery had failed, her divorce settlement was tied up in court, and creditors were threatening to seize her assets. Your Honor, Kane interrupted, the defendant had clear motive as well. The victim was threatening to expose irregularities in her adoption of 3 white children. Alleged irregularities, Lucas corrected. And we have documentation proving that every aspect of our adoption was legal and proper. Mr. Fitzgerald's threats were baseless, designed to extort money from an elderly woman who had done nothing wrong. Teresa reached over and squeezed Lucas's hand. She'd been silent through most of the proceedings, overwhelmed by watching her children fight so hard for her freedom. Furthermore, Lucas continued, we have evidence that Ms. Thomas posted on social media less than an hour after her father's death, before his body was even discovered, saying she was finally free to live her own life. This suggests prior knowledge of his death. Judge Hendricks leaned forward. Do you have this social media post? We do, Your Honor. We also have testimony from the hotel security guard who saw Ms. Thomas leaving her father's office at 6:45 p.m., 15 minutes before he was seen drinking from his flask in the hotel bar. Lucas spent the next hour methodically dismantling the prosecution's case. He showed that the cyanide residue found in Teresa's van was consistent with standard cleaning supplies used by any commercial caterer. He demonstrated that dozens of people had access to Fitzgerald's food and drink that night. He presented character witnesses who testified to Teresa's reputation for kindness and integrity. But the most powerful moment came when he called Teresa to the stand. Mrs. Owen, he said formally, though his voice was gentle, did you kill Jerome Fitzgerald? No, I did not. Did you ever threaten him? I told him I wouldn't be intimidated by his blackmail attempts. I told him our family was built on love, not money, and that he could take his threats and go to hell. A few people in the gallery chuckled at Teresa's bluntness. Mrs. Owen, why didn't you contact your children when you were arrested? Teresa's voice broke slightly. Because I've spent 30 years protecting them. I wasn't going to stop just because I was in trouble. I'd rather die than see their lives ruined because of me. And now, how do you feel about them risking their careers to save you? Teresa looked at Lucas, then at Diana and Harlow sitting in the front row. Proud. Terrified, grateful. They've become everything I hoped they would be and more. They're proof that love really can conquer anything. When Kane cross-examined Teresa, he tried to paint her as a manipulative woman who had somehow gamed the system to adopt white children for financial gain. But Teresa's quiet dignity and obvious love for her children made his attack seem petty and desperate. The hearing lasted 2 days. On the second day, Lucas played his final card. Your Honor, we call Peyton Fitzgerald Thomas to the stand. Kane objected strenuously, but Judge Hendricks allowed it. Peyton Thomas was a thin, nervous woman who looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. Under Lucas's questioning, she admitted to being in debt, to having access to her father's office, to knowing about his flask. Ms. Thomas, where did you learn about cyanide? I don't know what you mean. You have a degree in chemistry from Vanderbilt University. You worked for a pharmaceutical company before opening your art gallery. You would know exactly how much cyanide would be lethal and how quickly it would work. That doesn't mean I killed my father. No, but this does. Lucas pulled out a final document. This is a receipt from a chemical supply company, dated 1 week before your father's death. You purchased potassium cyanide, claiming it was for art restoration. Peyton's face went white. That's not. Ms. Thomas, did you kill your father? The courtroom was silent. Peyton looked around wildly, at the reporters, at the judge, at Teresa sitting calmly at the defense table. He was going to cut me off, she whispered. He said I was a disappointment, that I'd never get another penny from him. I was going to lose everything. My house, my kids, everything. The courtroom erupted. Kane was on his feet objecting, but it was too late. Peyton Thomas had just confessed to murder. Judge Hendricks banged her gavel for order. Ms. Thomas, I'm advising you to stop talking and request an attorney. But Peyton was beyond hearing. I put it in his flask when he wasn't looking. I knew he'd drink from it during the dinner. I never meant for anyone else to get blamed. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. 2 hours later, Judge Hendricks issued her ruling. Based on the new evidence presented and the confession we've just heard, I'm granting the motion for a new trial. Furthermore, I'm ordering the immediate release of Teresa Owen. All charges against her are hereby dismissed. Teresa collapsed into Lucas's arms, sobbing with relief. Diana and Harlow rushed forward, and for the first time in a month, the Owen family was together and free. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions, but Lucas held up his hand for silence. 30 years ago, Teresa Owen saved 3 orphan children when the world said she shouldn't. She taught us that family isn't about matching skin color or sharing DNA. It's about showing up for each other, no matter what. Today, we got to show up for her. He looked at Teresa, who was surrounded by her children, her face radiant with joy and relief. Justice isn't just about law, he continued. It's about love refusing to give up. It's about family fighting for family. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, love wins. 6 months later, Teresa Owen celebrated her 83rd birthday in her backyard on Avalon Street, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and half the neighborhood. The house was full of laughter and music and the smell of her famous cornbread. Lucas had returned to his job at the Justice Department with a commendation for his pro bono work. Harlow was back in Boston, saving children's lives. Diana continued her work with Memphis's most vulnerable kids. But every Sunday, they all came home, because Teresa had taught them that home wasn't a place. It was the people who loved you unconditionally, who fought for you when the world turned against you, who never gave up hope. As the sun set over Memphis, Teresa looked around at her family and smiled. She'd been given a second chance at life, and she wasn't going to waste a single moment of it. Love had won, just like she'd always known it would. 1 year and 45 days after Teresa Owen walked free from death row, she stood in her kitchen on Christmas morning, watching 3 generations of her family fill every corner of her house. The dining room table had been extended with card tables to accommodate everyone. Lucas and his wife Jennifer with their twins, Harlow and her partner Dr. Rebecca Martinez with their adopted daughter from China, Diana and her husband Peter with their newborn son Jerome, named after the grandfather he would never meet but whose legacy lived on in love. The kitchen counter overflowed with dishes that told the story of their blended family. Teresa's famous cornbread sat next to Jennifer's Korean bulgogi, Rebecca's Puerto Rican pastels, and Peter's Italian tiramisu. The children, ranging from toddlers to teenagers, spoke in a mixture of languages and accents that would have confused outsiders but sounded like home to Teresa. "Grandma T, tell us the story again," called out 8-year-old May, Harlow's daughter, who had been fascinated by the tale of how her grandmother had been saved by her children. "Which story, baby?" Teresa asked, though she knew exactly which one May meant. "The one about how love saved you from the bad people." Teresa smiled, settling into her favorite chair as the family gathered around her. At 84, she moved a little slower, but her mind was sharp and her heart was full. "Well," she began, "it started 30 years ago when 3 little children needed a mama, and a mama needed 3 little children." As she told the story, Teresa's eyes found the wall of framed articles and awards that had grown over the past year. The Tennessee Bar Association had publicly censured Robert Mills, Teresa's original defense attorney, stripping him of his license for gross incompetence and failure to provide adequate representation. The state had implemented new protocols requiring experienced attorneys for death penalty cases and mandatory forensic review of all capital convictions. Next to the disciplinary notice hung a newspaper clipping, "Peyton Thomas sentenced to life without parole." The woman who had murdered her father and nearly cost Teresa her life was now serving her sentence at the Tennessee Prison for Women, ironically in the same facility where Teresa had awaited execution. Justice had been swift once the truth emerged. "And then what happened, Grandma T?" prompted little Jerome, Diana's son, even though he'd heard this story dozens of times. Then the judge said the magic words, "All charges dismissed." And the bad lady who really hurt that man went to prison forever, where she belongs. "And what about the man who hurt your first family?" asked Marcus, Lucas's son. At 10, he was old enough to understand the deeper layers of their family's story. Teresa's expression grew solemn. "Well, baby, that man died before he could be punished for what he did. But your daddy made sure everyone knew the truth." The police officially reopened the case from 1994 and put it on record that Jerome Fitzgerald was the drunk driver who killed your uncle and Aunt Barnett. It can't bring them back, but the truth matters. Lucas nodded from across the room. The Nashville Police Department had issued a formal statement acknowledging that Fitzgerald's political connections had prevented proper investigation of the drunk driving incident 30 years ago. While justice couldn't be served posthumously, the historical record had been corrected, and the Barnett family name had been cleared of any suggestion that the accident was anything other than a preventable tragedy caused by a wealthy man's reckless choices. "Tell them about the papers, Mama T," Diana encouraged, bouncing baby Jerome on her knee. "Oh yes," Teresa said, her voice growing stronger. "Some people said our adoption wasn't done right, that there was something wrong with a black mama raising white babies. But Diana got all the papers checked by fancy lawyers, and you know what they found." "What?" the children chorused. "They found that every single thing was done perfectly. Every signature, every approval, every step was exactly right. The adoption was so proper and legal that the lawyers said it should be used as an example of how adoption should be done." Diana had indeed commissioned 3 independent legal reviews of their adoption records. Each had concluded that not only was the adoption completely legitimate, but it had been handled with exceptional care and attention to legal requirements. The 1994 social workers and judges had been thorough and professional, creating an unassailable legal foundation that no amount of posthumous slander could undermine. "And now," Teresa continued, "your daddy Lucas started something special called the Teresa Owen Justice Fund to help other people who get blamed for things they didn't do. The foundation had been established 6 months ago and had already helped overturn 2 wrongful convictions. Lucas had partnered with the Innocence Project and several law schools to provide pro bono representation for indigent defendants facing capital charges. The fund also lobbied for criminal justice reform, ensuring that what happened to Teresa would be less likely to happen to others. As the afternoon wore on, the family shared memories, played games, and created new traditions. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with laughter and love. Children who had never known hunger played alongside children who remembered it well. Adults who had overcome impossible odds watched their own children grow up safe and secure. When evening came and the extended family began to head home, Harlow lingered behind to help with dishes. "Mama T," she said, "I got a call from the Tennessee Department of Corrections yesterday. They want me to consult on improving their medical protocols for death row inmates. Apparently, our case exposed some serious problems with their healthcare system." Teresa nodded approvingly. Even in her darkest hour, good had come from their struggle. The state's near execution of an innocent woman had sparked comprehensive reforms in the criminal justice system, from better legal representation to improved forensic standards to more humane treatment of inmates. That's good, baby. Maybe some good can come from all that pain. It already has, Mama. Look around you. Teresa did look around, at the house filled with evidence of love multiplied across generations. Photos covered every surface. Graduations, weddings, births, holidays, ordinary moments made precious by the knowledge of how easily they could have been lost. As the last car pulled away, Teresa stood on her front porch, looking out at the neighborhood that had watched her children grow up. Mrs. Caldwell's house was dark now. She'd passed away 2 years ago, but not before apologizing to Teresa for her early doubts about the adoption. The new family that moved in had brought their children over to introduce themselves, asking if Teresa would teach their daughter to braid hair. The circle continued, love begetting love, kindness creating more kindness. Teresa thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. Every loose thread had been tied up, every question answered, every injustice addressed as much as humanly possible. Jerome Fitzgerald's drunk driving had been officially acknowledged. Peyton Thomas was serving life in prison. Robert Mills had been disbarred. The adoption's legitimacy had been definitively proven. The criminal justice system had been reformed. And most importantly, their family had emerged stronger than ever. She thought about the truth she'd learned over and over again. That family wasn't about blood or color or circumstances. It was about showing up, day after day, year after year, with open hearts and stubborn love. As she turned to go inside, Teresa whispered a prayer of gratitude to the God who had seen fit to give her not one family, but two. The babies in heaven who had prepared her heart for love, and the children on earth who had filled it to overflowing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new opportunities to love and be loved. But tonight, Teresa Owen was exactly where she belonged. Home, surrounded by the family that love had built, in a house where every room held memories of grace triumphant. The porch light stayed on, as it always did, a beacon for anyone who needed to find their way home. Sometimes the most beautiful families are born not from blood, but from choice. Sometimes justice comes not from the system, but from love that refuses to give up. And sometimes, the people we save end up saving us right back. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.